The top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. Accenture joins the growing list of companies ditching diversity and inclusion targets as they look at the changing political landscape in the United States. Tesla sales fall across Europe, but is it because the company's chief executive, Elon Musk, is backing far-right parties across the continent? Plus...
Yo. What's that? What's that?
Remember that? The lasting power of TV advertising. We'll hear why companies are still willing to pay up for prime spots ahead of the Superbowl this weekend. Very good afternoon and welcome to Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. On this Friday, we're going to begin with Accenture that has joined a growing list of companies scrapping the diversity and inclusion targets following Donald Trump's return to the White House. Other firms to ditch diversity, equity and inclusion, or DEI as they're called, over recent weeks, including giants such as Meta, Amazon, Alphabet, Walmart and McDonald's. Since returning to office, President Trump has issued a number of executive orders aimed at dismantling these programs across federal government and the private sector. Well, delighted to say I'm joined by Lydia Unwa, who is the chief executive of insight agency Blacklight and a founder of the Black Pound Report. Very good afternoon to you, Lydia. Thanks for joining us. Why do you think that really long and growing list of companies are deciding to dismantle these targets?
I believe they're being influenced by the political, by what Trump is implementing. So they're following suit. And that quite often happens when you have a prime minister or president that comes in and they lay out the law of what they require. But, research shows from the Black Pound Report and other reports out there that diversity fuels growth. So to release and let go of these types of programs can only have a negative impact. And if they're going to change the acronym for something else, it of course still remains inclusive businesses that are representative, are more innovative, they grow more, they're more relevant to society and the global industry at large.
Well, wouldn't some of these companies say that actually they've made quite significant progress in the last decade or so, and that actually the reason they don't need these targets anymore is because actually their organisations are much more reflective of society?
They could say that, but at the end of the day, you always have to measure. Data is the new oil, as they say. You have to measure. So if you're doing well in business, does that mean that you stop measuring? Does that mean all of a sudden, because you're successful, you stop what you're doing? You always have to look at what you're doing, reflect upon it, and look where you're growing and look what areas where you're not and make changes to that. So scrapping these DI programs is a fearful move. And people are seeing DI programs or initiatives as a risk, but actually it makes the business more relevant.
But the way, we've talked about, we've lent into this idea that it is because Donald Trump is now in the White House that these companies feel the need to do that. But is that true? I mean, McDonald's is a big company. It doesn't really need President Trump. Isn't the truth of the matter that maybe actually Donald Trump got elected because people's attitudes have changed?
People's attitudes will change all the time, but the thing that remains the same is we are a multicultural world, and that is never changing. If anything, the population will expand. In 2030, the UK even alone the landscape will be very different. So if you are not in tune and in touch with your consumers, your employees and the businesses at large, you won't be relevant in business. So companies like McDonald's, if they want to withdraw because they feel they've got enough representation in the business, well, I can't really do anything about that. But what I can do is keep reiterating the message that a diverse business, an inclusive business, one that's representative, not from the very bottom, but from the very top, in its thinking, in its decision-making, they are the ones that will be successful. This is just fashionable for now to get rid of all these DI agendas. And there's also a lot of fear because companies feel they will not get investment.
But Lydia, I suppose the point is the critics of these schemes would say the only reason they were started in the first place is because it became fashionable. And, they would make this argument that actually if you want a company to be successful, if you want it to be inclusive, if you want it to succeed, you employ the best people to do the best jobs rather than necessarily trying to reach targets.
I would not deny you. Of course, you must employ the best people, and you must make sure that you span your net really wide. Not that you have a monolithic business that everybody looks the same, thinks the same, because that's the first way of ending a business and losing every single bit of income and interest. It's really important. I hear what you're saying. Some companies did jump on a bandwagon for DEI, and we know the reason why they did that. But there are ones that are sticking with this because they know that their thinking will be better. They'll have more profits because it will impact the bottom line. And these businesses have to think about the consumers, because these consumers, they vote with their feet, and they're very vocal and they're very ethical. So it's really important for them to think twice about the decisions that they're making. And one more thing to add is, within the workplace, if everybody doesn't have the opportunity to be included, I'm not only talking about people from Black and multi-ethnic backgrounds, I'm talking about everyone. If you walk into work, if you go to business and you're being ignored, that's not profitable. You won't stay in the business. You need businesses that are sustainable, that can keep top talent. And you have to really accept this, that businesses that are more inclusive are the ones that will always be successful.
Okay, no, and it is an ongoing debate, one that I'm sure is going to prompt a lot of reaction, and one that we're definitely going to return to, Lydia, no doubt. Thank you very much indeed for joining us there from Blacklight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's have a look at how the markets are doing this afternoon. Delighted to say we're joined by Tree Koshu Yugovindan, who joins us from Aberdeen. Good to see you again. And I suppose the markets are still digesting, aren't they, that Bank of England rate decision yesterday and those forecasts around growth.
That's right. It was slightly surprising. There was quite a mixed message, and it took a little while for the markets to settle down and really understand what's being said here. So first of all, they cut rates by a quarter of a point, but it was the vote from the board that was surprising. There was Catherine Mann, who was traditionally a hawk, who then voted for half a point cut. So that was a surprise. So the markets moved suddenly in towards a dovish direction. But then we had the press conference, the release of the monetary policy report. And within that, we had a mixed bag of messages. So first of all, the wording changed. Rather than signaling cuts would be gradual, the market interpreted that initially as a quarter point cut every 3 months. Now, the fact that they added an extra word of cautious, that gave a signal, well, you can move in either direction. So hence it was a mixed message there, because there's a lot of uncertainties over the outlook.
And there is, because we also expect inflation to tick up, but probably further interest rate cuts this year. Is that right? Which seems kind of like they should not follow one another.
Well, what's happening is that inflation has trended lower, and that's very good. Underlying inflation trend has been lower. So services inflation, that's a key signal of what's actually happening in the economy. But we are going to see a pickup in inflation because of energy prices. Now, usually the bank would look through that because that's a temporary move higher. So that would be one thing to remember. But then going forward, the bank did actually raise its inflation forecast further down, a few years down the line. So there is a bit of a mixed message there. Now, what we are expecting is further rate cuts, and really it depends on the growth picture. I think what we're seeing from the bank is a shift in emphasis away from inflation and more concerned about growth. The messaging throughout the conference was really looking at the weaker growth numbers that we've seen. There is a risk that you could see a contraction in growth in GDP in Q4 of last year. And I think that's their bigger concern at the moment.
Yeah, indeed, and the impact it could well have on governments, literally government spending, actually. Isn't that the big point, that next month the Chancellor might have to make some big decisions briefly?
That's right. I think the Chancellor has been under some pressure recently, and part of that is because of the movements in the gilt market and the yields in the bond market. Some of this has been driven by global factors. We are not immune to what's happening in the US. But there was an extra move earlier on this year. Bond yields in the UK actually moved close to 5%. And that was very worrying. It's come back down now. But that just means that there's a higher risk that the Chancellor will breach the fiscal rules that have been set. And that means she'll have to make some announcements to try and appease the markets and ensure that there is a strong fiscal outlook. And growth is the key way to move forward here, and that has been the government's focus in recent meetings at Davos, at the EU summit recently. So that's been a key focus for the UK government.
Indeed, yeah. OK, Tree, Cochin, Govan and Dan, thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon from Aberdeen. Thank you. Now, Tesla sales are down across Europe, with almost 60% fewer cars being sold in Germany in January than in the same period last year. Some have pointed to the company's chief executive, Elon Musk's politics, as perhaps being the reason behind the downturn. Is it true? Let's speak to David Bailey, Professor of Business Economics at Burnham's Business School. Good afternoon to you, David. What do you reckon?
Hi. Yeah. I think it's certainly a factor. I mean, I've been driving around in my 8-year-old Tesla with a sticker on the back saying, I bought this before Elon went crazy. And I'd certainly have second thoughts about buying another Tesla. So he's been hugely polarizing. I think that's a factor. There are other things going on, though. The competition has really hotted up. There's a lot more choice for consumers in terms of the range of electric vehicles that's available. And also Tesla have, frankly, fallen behind. It's an aging model lineup. And they've made some mistakes, for example, in terms of the waste of money on the Cybertruck, where sales have been pretty disastrous.
I suppose let's dissect some of that, David, if we can. First of all, you've been covering cars and motor manufacturing and sales for a long time. I mean, I don't think we've had quite a character like Elon Musk, but how much does politics or even the country that a car comes from have an impact on someone's willingness to buy it or not?
So I don't think we've ever kind of been in this territory before. I think kind of the country a car comes from has an impact. I mean, traditionally, for example, in the UK, we've tended to favour German cars because we think they are quality. More recently, Japanese cars. So I think, the kind of Americanness of it was a factor, although many of the Teslas that we buy in the UK are made in China. But the character of Musk and the things that he's been doing, we've not really seen a car industry leader gets so involved in politics in the way that Musk has, and in particular, a certain brand of politics which favours a right wing and is therefore very, very divisive.
But you're essentially saying there are other things at play here that actually Tesla, which was a genuine pioneer and a world leader in many regards, it just isn't there anymore.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's remarkable the share price is still so high, despite the fact that it's been falling behind, frankly. The model lineup is pretty aged. I think consumers in Europe in particular are waiting for a refreshed version of the Model Y, so that may be a factor. But Tesla hasn't brought to market, for example, a €20,000 Tesla, a kind of, Model 1, as it were, that they promised previously. They've spent a lot of time and energy on things like the Cybertruck and more recently the robo-taxi. Now, I'm critical on that as well, because I don't think the technology is nearly advanced as many investors think on that. So, I just don't think they've kept up with market trends. BYD in particular, I think, has overtaken them, but many other brands have caught up with Tesla and can offer them a good run for the money now. That wasn't the case 5 years ago.
Just two final questions, and briefly if you can, David. I suppose one of them is, do you think Elon Musk cares? And the second thing is, can he do all these jobs? Because he's got a hell of a lot of them.
Well, you do wonder at what point Tesla shareholders will become fed up with him. I mean, there was an issue when he went off to X because they thought he wasn't spending enough time on Tesla. He's now, of course, in the Trump administration trying to cut costs there as well. So you do wonder, how much time is he actually spending at Tesla? There may come a point where Tesla itself thinks, actually, do you know what? We've had enough of you. Does he care? Who knows? He's certainly got his own agenda. Whether in the process he alienates a lot of potential buyers, I think that's a big one for the shareholders ultimately down the line.
Yeah, when you think about it, he's got X, he's got Starlink, he's got SpaceX, he's got this job in the US government, he's got Tesla.
Boring company, yep.
Yeah, a lot. David, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. David Bailey there, the Professor of Business Economics at the University of Birmingham. OK, let's talk about what's coming up on Business Live in just a couple of minutes.
Yo. What's that? What's that?
Hold on. God, it was annoying, but it was very effective. We'll be looking at the lasting power of TV adverts ahead of the Super Bowl in just a couple of minutes.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the net?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing.
A towering monument to the China dream and its demise.
From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart.
China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world.
Mass protests forced the president to flee.
The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor.
Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child.
The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them.
A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide.
Sydney's floodplains underwater again.
This is the third or fourth time in 18 months that their homes have gone under.
Sky News, the full story first.
It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering, designed to humour and to help us.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
I just took a shower above the clouds. You know why? Because this is the Emirates A380. Fly better. Thank you.
Very welcome back to Business Live. Now, you'll probably remember some, if not all, of these.
The old sailors returned to the bar. Here's to you, Ahab! And the fat drummer hit the beat with all his heart.
This side.
Bow, chicka, bow, wow. Chicka, bow. Wow, ow, 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 wow, ow.
Yo.
What's that?
What's that?
Hold on. Hello?
Could be very annoying, but you probably would remember them, don't you? Very difficult to forget. That's the power of advertising, isn't it? I think someone in the newsroom just mentioned the one with Cadbury's and the gorillas playing on their drums. We all have our favourite advertisements, and commercials have had their heyday, or it felt like they did, in the 80s, the 90s, the early noughties with TV advertising, but they still do hold enormous power, particularly during the Super Bowl. So as the Philadelphia Eagles prepare to take on Kansas City Chiefs this Sunday, I spoke to Matt Edwards, partner at the creative agency Big Spall, and I began by asking about why those adverts from the 90s have often outlived the programmes in which they were shown alongside.
There was tracking studies that showed that back then people enjoyed the commercials often more than they enjoyed the programmes.
And why was that? You know, I mean, a lot of money and thought went into them, didn't they?
I think part of it was because before the advent of the video recorder and then the PVR after that, people were captive audiences. They couldn't skip the ads that were coming at them in the middle of Coronation Street on ITV. And therefore, it was a great platform for reaching over 10 million people in one hit, and therefore it was worth spending the money, the budget, the time, the strategy, the crafting to put the very best thing in front of people that you could create.
And that's the extraordinary thing, isn't it? You know, these advertisements didn't just become kind of cultural moments in some ways, and we think about the Budweiser WhatsApp one, or we think about, you know, Guinness that over the years have produced some incredible advertisements, but actually they clearly also drove sales. I mean, they made people go and buy things.
Yeah, there've been many campaigns that have been phenomenally successful, built off the back of very strong TV and cinema advertising. I used to run the Stella Artois account in the UK back in the days of Reassuringly Expensive, and that was double-digit growth year on year on year, became an absolutely enormous brand off the back of positioning it as a beer drunk by peasants in the south of France in the 15th century. So, yeah, I mean, lots of really iconic campaigns that people remember. And I think one of the mistakes people sometimes make is that people sometimes go back to very, very old commercials, like the fruit and nut commercial for Cadbury that had a song that went with it. And they think that actually the commercials were a lot better in those days. But actually what they're forgetting is that those commercials were able to hit millions and millions of people many, many, many times. And to do that today in the same way, you'd have to spend hundreds of millions of pounds because of the way the media landscape is completely fragmented.
Yeah, it's interesting there. You just made me immediately think of the milk tray man from Cadbury's when you talked about fruit and nuts. Just talking about that and where advertising revenue has gone, clearly in the last 20 years, that 30-second spot advert has just not been as big as audiences have kind of smashed and shattered elsewhere.
It's not been as big in terms of the audiences, but it's never entirely gone away. And I think that the death of the TV commercial has often been exaggerated. Often what is happening is that what you would previously define as a TV commercial, you might call a short 30-second film now, and that's still being watched. So even the younger generations, they'll still be watching that. They'll be streaming Love Island on ITVX and watching the commercials. They'll be seeing ads for Burberry and Lacoste on Instagram. So it's not that it's ever really gone away. It's just being consumed in many, many more different places.
And, you know, just leading on to that, the whole point is actually we've seen a bit of a resurgence recently. You talked about ITVX there, but we know Netflix and Amazon Prime now have advertisements.
Yeah, this is the really fascinating thing, because it's like the future is looping back on itself. Because now you've got these streaming services where big tech has actually made it even harder to avoid the commercials. So the same big tech companies that perhaps came along and allowed us to skip the ads are now creating a world where, yes, you can skip the commercials, but only when a benevolent algorithm decrees it.
OK, and let's finally talk about the Super Bowl. Obviously, big weekends, sporting events are where hundreds of millions of people watch live sport, and it's where those advertisements, because you don't want to skip them, because you want to watch the sport live, still get watched by a hell of a lot of people.
Yeah, certainly in the Super Bowl, but also it's the circus that goes around it. So a good example, there's a David Beckham commercial featuring Matt Damon as well for Stella Artois this year. And interestingly, I was out in London yesterday, and there are posters all over London promoting that commercial. So there's a poster of David Beckham. It says "The Other David." You don't really know what it's about. It's trailing the commercial, just in the same way that film studios might trail a Hollywood movie. And so I came back, I Googled it, I watched it on YouTube. So people are going to watch those commercials, yes, in the Super Bowl in real time, but they'll also watch them way, way beyond that.
And just finally, Matt, I mean, how much money are we talking about this weekend? How big is it going to be?
Well, David Beckham and Matt Damon don't come cheap. So even before you've started to film the commercial, that's millions of dollars. You've then got to shoot the thing. And I think the price for a 30-second spot is being quoted at around $7 million, I think I read. There's a wait list of about 12 advertisers, so clearly the demand is there. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of commercials, a lot of brands advertising, and a heck of a lot of money spent.
Matt, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
There you go, that was Matt Edwards. That is it from me on Business Live. Back, of course, at 11:30 on Monday morning. Do join me to then, if you can. Up next, it is the News Hour with Jonathan Samuels. Have the best of weekends. Goodbye.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that work